Alrighty, good afternoon everybody from IBC 2016. My name is Karl Soule, and I'm going to be talking about Adobe After Effects and some of the enhancements and improvements that we have been making to After Effects over the last few years. Now if you take a step back in time to somewhere around 2012, 2013, we had a series of After Effects releases that were coming out with all kinds of amazing technology like 3D camera tracking. If you go back and look at things like the Roto Brush, After Effects has always been known for creating these magical new tools which really simplify and make common tasks a much easier process. But as we talk to the After Effects community over and over again, the one new feature that everybody kept asking for was better performance. After Effects as a piece of software has been around for over 20 years. And we felt it was necessary to kind of look under the hood and look around in the code base and use new modern techniques in coding that didn't exist 20 years ago when Adobe first created After Effects. How many here have been using After Effects for a long time? Anybody here know what the name of After Effects 1.0 was called? It wasn't called After Effects. Anyone? Michelle Galena, the product marketing manager for After Effects. You know the name. COSA. Well, have a seat. It was called A. Oh, okay. Now you got me. I didn't even know that. All right. So After Effects definitely has been around for a long time, and so the team on the After Effects programming group, they decided to create kind of go under the hood and re-architecture the way After Effects works. Make it modular, make it so different things going on at different times are all separately threaded. Make it modular in a way that we can go in and change bits and pieces out over time so that we can adopt these new modern coding techniques. And so the first release of this to the public came out in 2015, After Effects 2015. And it really changed the interoperability inside of After Effects. It made it more responsive. It made it so you could be playing back a comp and at the same time come over to the project bin, start to play with, reorganize different comps. You can even go in and start twirling down layers and actually be making adjustments in your compositions at the same time the composition is playing back. We changed the overall architecture for previewing. It used to be called RAM Preview. We now just call it Preview because we're using a lot of new techniques in the Preview function that include things like disk caching. So every time you render a frame, that frame is stored and we reuse those frames even across multiple projects, across multiple compositions. If we see a frame that's identical to another frame in another comp, we'll actually just reuse that same frame. We also started doing things like separating out previewing on a per layer basis. So if you have a big stack of layers inside your composition and you make a change to the top layer, it doesn't have to go back and re-render everything from scratch again. So all of these changes really improved the overall performance inside of After Effects. And again, with that interactive performance, having different components running in different threads, it really, really improved on the overall performance in After Effects. Now this year, we've introduced two different releases that again build on that process, and this is going to be an ongoing process for the After Effects community. They want me to tell you guys that they're not done yet. This is sort of like we're at stage 2 of a multi-stage process here. And some of the improvements that we're previewing here at the show include the ability to do playback of multiple comps and keep the audio and video in sync. If you've ever tried to play back anything with audio and After Effects in the past, keeping it perfectly precisely in sync could be a challenge. This was actually cut and trimmed based on an audio track here in After Effects. And watch and listen and see if the audio and video stay in sync. So this now means that when we do playback inside of After Effects, things will just stay in sync. And even when you have a situation where you have dozens of different nested comps and you're trying to kind of cut something together for the final time, you can definitely do this. Now, a new thing that we have also added is just better overall playback for video components. So if I'm in a situation where I just have a video clip and I just want to throw it in a new comp and hit play, I can now do that, and I don't have to worry about dropping frames. I don't have to pre-render frames. It will actually do this very, very naturally, do it automatically for me, so I can go through and I can look at video clips, and again, audio and video playback directly inside of After Effects. So these just seem like really minor improvements, but they make a big change to what's going on under the hood. We're starting to use some of the playback technology from Adobe Premiere inside of After Effects. And part of this also means using new pieces of hardware that didn't exist 20 years ago. One of the big changes to After Effects is more and more use of the graphics card within After Effects. When Adobe introduced the Mercury playback engine in Adobe Premiere Pro, one of the first questions I got was an After Effects user ran up to me and said, "When is this coming to After Effects?" I can now say that if you go into After Effects and open up your project settings, you can now turn on the Mercury GPU acceleration that we have had over in Adobe Premiere. We now have taken components of that and brought them to After Effects so that we can use GPU acceleration and start to run GPU accelerated effects inside of After Effects for the first time. This supports 3 main framework technologies very similar to Premiere Pro. We support OpenCL, we support CUDA, which is the NVIDIA architecture. So if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, you would probably choose CUDA. You could also choose OpenCL. And then on the Mac, Apple has a special GPU framework which was just introduced in the last 2 years. After Effects was actually one of the first applications to preview using this metal architecture at the WWDC Developers Convention that Apple holds every year. Our director of engineering was actually on stage demonstrating a version of After Effects taking advantage of metal, and we're now really excited to bring that to everybody. So if you're a Mac user, if you're using the newer operating systems on the Mac, you'll be able to select metal and get great performance on the Mac. Now I'm going to go ahead and just select OpenCL for now, and just to give you a couple of examples of how this works, let's start by just opening up a couple of GPU effects here. So I've got a comp, and I'll just start playing this comp back here. Now at this point, I don't have any effects on this background video, and I really like these clouds, but I want to do some changes to this. I'm going to go to my effects and presets, and let's just go into the color effects. And something that you'll notice in After Effects for the first time, some of these effects now have this little icon that will look very familiar to Premiere Pro users. The brightness and contrast effect has a GPU accelerated icon, and this means that this will take advantage and run much, much faster on the GPU than it would if the CPU had to process that effect. We've been adding additional ones, and new at the show here, we've got some like hue saturation. The Lumetri color effect we showed earlier this year. We've got the tint effect. There's various blurs that you can use that are GPU accelerated. And what this means is I can take these, drag them and drop them on a layer, and while this is playing back, I can actually go in and start to make modifications to this. And you can see that I'm actually modifying this while this is playing back, and it's not going through and dropping frames. In fact, it's previewing faster than the playhead is moving. So this is a huge leap forward when you're working with these different types of effects. Now, another use case for this is for people who use After Effects and Premiere Pro together. Most of you know that Premiere Pro, and I'm going to go ahead and launch Premiere in the background here. Most of you know that Premiere and After Effects tightly work together using a technology called Adobe Dynamic Link. And what this means is if you can play a comp in After Effects, you can actually send that over to Premiere Pro, and Premiere will treat it like a video clip. You can put it on the timeline, you can trim it, you can do anything that you can do to a video clip. So what I'm going to do, let's just open up a project here. I'll just go in and let's open up a recent project. I've got one right there. And I'm going to go ahead and open the sequence that we've been working with some different surfing footage here. Let's go back to After Effects. And in After Effects, I've got a series of these different motion graphics comps. So here's a nice one that says Chapter 1 on it. I want to use that in Premiere. Now, what you can do today is you can take a comp that you're working on in After Effects, start to drag it, and you can drop that right into a Premiere project, and it will appear in Premiere, and the animation will come across, and you can actually use this inside of Premiere Pro. This is nothing new. Let's go ahead and put this on my timeline here. I'll go ahead and I'll find one of the upper tracks here. Let's go ahead and make sure that's targeted. And I'll just drag this up and drop it in here. And you can see I've got this wonderful graphic that comes up here on the screen. What if I want to change this? Well, to take this a step further, any graphic with text layers can actually have editable text over inside of Premiere Pro. So you can see I can change this from Chapter 1. In fact, let me put this, we'll get this parked on a frame here where we have this nice circle graphic. Now watch what happens when I go in and change that from 1 to 27. This is something that I have a number of broadcasters that are actually using this right now. So what you'll notice is the size of the circle actually is scaling relative to the size of the text field. So as you make changes to this, the background elements actually understand the size and the length of the text field and will adjust themselves accordingly. You can also take this and alt drag it to make a copy of it. And each of these on the timeline can have different text being used on the timeline. So I could make Chapter 28, Chapter 29, and just keep going with this and not have to re-import every single time. Now, the one thing that we've heard from motion graphics artists is the challenge with this is you have to give the entire After Effects project file to the editor. Now, that can be a good thing in some cases. But I also know that there are some motion graphics artists and some editors that kind of fight about the design and the color scheme and everything else. And I've had editors say, you know, I don't like what this guy did with the color here. I'm going to make everything bright orange. And if you know After Effects, that, you know, you could go in and do that, and you basically would break branding standards and a bunch of other things. So what we're introducing here at the show is a new function. So rather than having to send the whole After Effects project file with all of the different comps in it, if you just want to send this one composition, in the future you will be able to just right-click on this and choose Save Composition as a Text Template. This makes something called a .ae cap file. So this is not openable in After Effects, but it is something that can drag and drop right into Premiere Pro. Anything that is modifiable, that is set by the graphics artist, will show up in the Effect Controls panel in Premiere. So you don't even have to have all the text layers be modifiable. If you have a text layer that is a graphic element, or you're doing a sporting event and you want to say, you know, I'll use something generic here like world event, world soccer or something. You want to put that as a branding element as part of a graphic in the background. You don't want the editor to be able to change that. You can lock the layers out in After Effects, and when you create the text template, those will not show up as editable text over in After Effects. So we're trying to really build this relationship in a way where graphics artists can create these templates and hand them off to the editor. The editor just gets the ability to modify things that they need to. Things like, you know, names, titles, you know, and maybe in the future we might even see more options on that level. So that's the some of the changes we're making with live text templates. And when you're working with GPU accelerated effects from After Effects, those effects will also run faster over in Premiere Pro, because again, leveraging the GPU with these various effects, Dynamic Link will take advantage of that and will actually run faster when you're using things like these live text templates. Okay, now another area that we've also been focusing on is just making sure that when you're doing things on screen, a lot of times we heard from customers that if they were previewing something and they turned on masks and tried to preview with the masks visible on screen, it could kind of slow their system down. We've accelerated the on-screen controls. So if I go into one of the menu settings here under display, I can hardware accelerate the composition layer and footage panels, and that gives me the ability to just hit play on a comp like this. And if I go through in my info panel, I can twirl this down and you can see this is a very complicated mask. There's like 20 different layers, there's hundreds of different keyframes involved in this, and it will continue to play back real time. So it's a much improved preview performance inside of After Effects, even when you're doing things like having all of these different masks being drawn with hundreds of different keyframes. It's not going to create a problem. Now, a big area of focus for us has been the use of 3D with After Effects. Do I have any users of Maxon Cinema 4D out in the audience? A couple hands? How many people would love to learn 3D but never have? I'm kind of in that category. Did you know that your copy of After Effects with Creative Cloud comes with a light version of Cinema 4D? Not a lot of people are aware of this. If you're in After Effects, if you want to launch Cinema 4D, go to New Maxon Cinema 4D File, and this will launch an included version of Cinema 4D on your system. Now I'm actually going to, just shake it up a little bit, I'm going to switch over to a Windows machine here to kind of showcase a little bit of this. So here I've got After Effects open on Windows and Mac, the controls, pretty much everything is the same. And what I've done here is created a little comp with some text and a shape layer. And we're applying, using the wiggler, where we've kind of created some nice camera motion that kind of looks very organic. It looks like a dolly kind of pulling back over an uneven floor. So we're using some of the power of After Effects with the wiggler to create that animation. But I want to make this true 3D. I want to actually start to extrude some various things, and I want to go in and actually use a little bit of Maxon Cinema 4D. We've done a lot of integration work with Cinema 4D, and I'm going to show you two different ways that we can actually leverage the Cinema 4D renderer. The first one, I'm actually going to launch Cinema 4D. So what I want to do is convert what I have here into a Cinema 4D project. To do that, I'm going to go to, with the project selected, let's go ahead and choose to export this out. And we have something called the Maxon Cinema 4D exporter. And it's just telling me that the audio won't be exported out. I'll go ahead and extrude this out as a C4D file. And let's go ahead and stick this on the desktop. And I'll just go ahead and call this one Saturday. All right. Now I'm going to open up a different composition, just a blank composition. Let's go ahead and make that fit. And I'm just going to import from the desktop. There's the file I just created called Saturday. And let's just bring that into this composition. Now you'll see this looks a little bit different. I've got this panel over on the side here called Cineware. So there's really tight integration between Cinema 4D and After Effects. where After Effects can actually read a C4D file. I can drop it right into a comp with video clips, with other objects. I can use lights and cameras to make all this happen. So using Cinema 4D and After Effects together kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You can do all kinds of really nice organic color adjustments, distorts, on different color channels, and together you can do some really amazing work. So here I've got something from, this is now a C4D object, and I've got some control over here on the left side with this Cineware plugin. This is a new version of Cineware that we just added earlier this year. So I can change this to a final mode here so we can get rid of that guide in the background. This has a lot of advanced functionality. If you've ever wondered how people do really realistic integration of a 3D object into a video scene, a lot of that involves multi-pass renderers, where you actually go through and you render out the specularity and the reflection as different layers and bring those in so that you can use color effects on each of these different layers. You might have to tone down the reflections with one effect, and you might have to boost a specular highlight in a different effect to kind of match the lighting properly. So that's where After Effects can really come in handy. And this Cineware renderer, I do have the option of turning on something called Cinema 4D multi-pass renders, and then I can pick, that will actually bring in the C4D file. Instead of being one layer, I'll have different layers for things like specularity, reflections. Everything will come in as individual layers, so I can modify and change those individually. Now, if I need the full version of Cinema 4D Lite to play around with, if I want to modify this further, simply choose Edit Original, and this will open up the composition inside of Cinema 4D Lite, and it's looking like there's an update. We'll just go ahead and close that. I can tweak this even further in here. So this has already applied a little bit of extrusion, but I can go ahead and select the text, come in here, and let's change the depth of this, maybe make it really big and beefy. We'll change the ring here. Let's make that more of like a small tube. And at this point, I'll just save this out and switch back over to After Effects, and this will update immediately. So here I'm going back and forth between Cinema 4D and After Effects, and this is where I'll just kind of skip to the end of this for the sake of time. You can really kind of combine the best of Cinema 4D, the best of After Effects, because, again, with all of the ways you can kind of play with color and distort things and use radio waves, this is kind of a finished version of what you can accomplish with this. You can see that we're adding some grain and noise to this to just give it much more of an organic look and feel. Now, if I can, let's switch back over to the Mac, because I want to show you something that we just came out with, just announced at this show. It's not available to the public yet, but it will be in the next version of After Effects. To do this, I'm going to start with an Illustrator file. This is a really wonderful graphic that was created in Adobe Illustrator. So this is a vector art piece. And as many of you know, you can take a vector art, you can bring in an Illustrator file, and there's a simple menu selection to convert that into shapes. And in the past, we could do things with animating those shapes and creating something that looks like this. Again, we're still looking at this in a very 2D space. Now, in the past, if you wanted to work in 3D in After Effects, you would really have to be limited to sort of a postcards in space type of an effect, what we call 2.5D. You really didn't have the ability to do a lot of extrusions without a lot of plugins and dedicated hardware and things like that. So I could probably, in the past, I could create and turn this this vector art into something that looks a little bit like this. But extrusion was something I couldn't do. I want to draw your attention to the upper right corner of the composition panel, where it currently says the renderer is the classic 3D renderer. So you can still work in this mode. This is still available to you. but we are adding, for the first time, the ability to actually use the Cinema 4D render engine inside of After Effects. So this means that we can take full advantage of the multi-threaded CPU-based renderer inside of Cinema 4D is now actually built right into After Effects. So instead of having to go over to Cinema 4D to take advantage of this, I can go through and start to do extrusion of text inside of After Effects directly. So as an example of this, we'll just go ahead and show you. You can see how the letter C, if you notice, if I kind of scrub through this, you can see how the letter C kind of builds into a ziggurat in 3D space. And if I want to, I can go in and actually pick one of these layers here, twirl down the 3D properties here. So you can see we have geometry options. I can play with extrusion depth on these various pieces. Let's go down to, let's try this layer here. And I can start to actually experiment with and actually dig in and create an extrusion of these different layers using the Cinema 4D renderer. Now, one of the things that we have also done, since a lot of people are just getting started with 3D, they know After Effects, but they haven't really dug deep into a 3D program. Part of the expertise in a 3D program is knowing what settings to turn on and what settings to turn off depending on the complexity of what you're working with. And you'll notice that there's this large list here on the screen that shows what is currently enabled and what is currently disabled. We've tried to build a lot of intelligence into a single slider so that if you're working fast and loose and you just want to do some quick animations and test a few things out, you can move this slider to the left, render in draft mode at speed, and it will disable a lot of things like anti-aliasing. When it's time to actually render out the final composition, you can take this and move this up. And of course, it gives you some guidelines as far as if you go beyond a certain point, this is where you really need it for like highly reflective surfaces where you need really precise ray tracing and you want to have the best possible anti-aliasing turned on a comp. So you now have a very simple, easy to use control to make these adjustments when you're working in 3D space. So instead of having to go out to Cinema 4D, you still have that as an option, but you now can create some amazing 3D animation directly inside of After Effects for the first time, using just about anything that you bring in, shapes, shape layers, Illustrator, vector art. You can extrude items and work with these in 3D space for the first time. So we're really, really excited to be bringing a full 3D renderer into After Effects that will run well regardless of the hardware that you're working with. This is all CPU based, so it doesn't require any specific graphics card to get this performance. If you know the performance in Cinema 4D, you'll know exactly the type of performance you can expect with the Cinema 4D renderer inside of After Effects. Folks, I'm completely out of time. I'll be around if you guys have any questions. We've got a wonderful presentation coming up next. There's a gentleman doing multicam editing for music videos. It's a fantastic presentation about the art of cutting music videos. Wonderful examples as well. So yeah, make sure and stay tuned for Simon Bryant, who'll be coming up next. Thank you guys so much.